The Colorado Authors League presents The Cal Zone, the League's official podcast. Welcome to a place for tasty conversation about books, art, and more, all created by members of the Colorado Authors League. Here's your host, Tricia Copeland.
Thank you for being here today. We have episode 2 of the Cal Zone podcast with author L.R. Braden. You are a fantasy author. Is it young adult or adult books?
I write adult books. I generally classify them as good for 16 and up.
Okay. And you have 2 series, and today we're going to talk to you about series, how they were created, any tips and tricks or things you've learned about how to write in series for authors from authors of Colorado Authors League. So thank you so much for being willing to be here. We're going to jump in. You have 2 series, the Magic Smith series and Rifter series. Do you want to talk about one of them first, or?
I can talk about them kind of in parallel because they have a shared universe.
Okay.
So the way that it transpired, my Magic Smith series came first. So there are currently 7 books out in my Magic Smith series, starting with A Drop of Magic. And when I got to the 5th book in the series, I introduced a character that I absolutely loved, and I created the Rifter series as a spin-off series to follow that character with a slightly different slant and different writing style to it. So
Okay.
The one series actually grew out of the other one.
Okay. And so you say a different slant, a different writing style. Do the 2 stories diverge? Are they in different locations? Or they have different goals? What does that look like?
So in the Magic Smith series, the entire series is written from a single first-person narrative perspective, and she lives here in Colorado, and so that's the main thrust of that series. And the person that she meets, the character she meets in book 5 is named Mira, who is a Rifter. She's possessed by a demon, and her series follows a 2-person, third-person narrative. So it's a dual narrative between the female main character and the male main character, and the whole thing's written in 3rd person instead of 1st person. And they travel around a lot. So like the first one takes place in Baltimore, and the second one is in Florida and Miami. The 3rd one is in Seattle. The 4th one is in Boston. So they travel more.
Fun. And it sounds like an urban fantasy setting. Is that correct?
Yes, so I write urban fantasy stories for sure. They're sort of a cross between urban fantasy and portal fantasy because most of it takes place in our world. Contemporary, you'll recognize a lot of things from real life. But I do have portals that connect to magical realms. So every now and then my characters, not in the Rifter series, but in the Magic Smith series, Alex travels to various Fey realms. So it is urban fantasy and portal fantasy.
Oh, fun. I love the Fae. You're talking my language now.
Excellent.
So when you started the series, was your plan to just keep going book after book after book, or do you have an end point that you're trying to get to?
So the way that I work in series is I usually have at least one overarching goal it stretches over multiple books, and then each individual book obviously has to have its own arc that is beginning, middle, end, so that it's a satisfying conclusion at the end of each book as well. When I started writing the Magic Smith series, I had an idea for a story, and I wrote a very brief outline of it. And I'm like, cool, this will be a great book. And I thought it was 1 book. And I wrote the outline, and then I realized, oh, this is 5 books. Okay. There's no way this is going to fit in 1 book. So I'm like, okay. So I did an outline for 5 books. And then when I started, my first publishing contract was for the first 3. And so I got those 3 out, and then I got the extended contract for the rest of them. And so I was really excited because I was like, oh no, I hope they let me write the last 2 because it's supposed to be 5. But then what actually happened is after that first contract, they loved the book so much, they actually wanted me to write more books. So then I'm like, oh, now I need to extend the series. And so what it actually is the first 5 books I call like my Revelations set. So the overarching storyline for there is Alex's sort of growing understanding of the world that she's in. Each book reveals a new aspect of her world and her powers, and it grows into a climax of book 5, where it creates a paradigm shift in the world. And so her place in the world changes drastically in book 5. And the way that the different species in my world, because again, urban fantasy, I've got all the species. I've got werewolves and vampires and fairies and witches and everybody in there. So a lot of my themes have to do with how those different species and races interact with each other. So in book 5, there's a huge paradigm shift. And so that created an opening then for me to make a second overarching storyline that would follow through the next 5 books. So I'm actually on book 8 right now. So I'm about halfway through that story arc.
Wow. Yeah. And yeah, it's interesting to me that you were able to fill in and create this whole second arc out of it. Because it doesn't sound like you have one enemy. Do you have one enemy, or are they, because things have shifted, there's not really one enemy they're trying to get rid of?
There is not a singular enemy in my stories. There are occasionally enemies that, again, stretch over them if it's the primary antagonist of the story, then they're going to be defeated in that story because I want it to be a satisfying conclusion. However, there are some antagonists that I created early in the series that I only let them have very small roles in the earlier books so that they could be larger antagonists for later books. And so it's not until later that you actually have the completion of that when they're the primary antagonist of the story.
Okay, interesting. That's a good way to think about doing a longer series. I mean, there's several ways you could do a series. If you think about it, you could do just a serial where it's like episodes like
yeah, the episodic, where you have each book can be a standalone adventure where you can read them out of order and it doesn't matter. Mine tends to be they compound as they go along. So while I try to rewrite every one of my books in a way that it's satisfying, if you were to never have read any of my books and you just pick up one randomly in the middle of my series, it should still be a satisfying read. It should have all of the elements that'll make it a fun story. But you would notice there are like hints that are being dropped for things that have already happened or things that happened in my parallel series or things like that, that if you haven't read the other books, you would be like, oh, I feel like I might be missing something, but it shouldn't impact your ability to enjoy the story.
Right, to read that one plot line and have it resolved.
Yeah.
Well, and some people do series where they concentrate on different characters, one after the other in the same world and what those characters are doing. But it seems like you're really looking at the character arc of this one character. Are you going to continue to do that? It seems like you have to, since it's first person, her voice, right?
Yeah, exactly. So for the Magic Smith series, currently I have 10 books planned. And like I said, I actually just finished writing book 8, so that one should be coming out early 2026, probably February. And so those 10 books for sure are going to be Alex's narrative perspective because she is my main character for that whole series. So what I've done, because there are side characters that I really love and that readers have really loved, and they've been like, hey, we want an adventure from this person's perspective and stuff. So what I do is I actually write short stories that are from the perspectives of the secondary characters. And they can be anywhere from really short stories all the way up to novellas. And I periodically will share those like with my newsletters and my, more dedicated readerships. And eventually, when I finish the Magic Smith series, I'll compile all of those into a single collection. And it'll be like a companion to the Magic Smith series. So you can see, and I'll put a timeline in there so you know where they go, because each of these short stories are happening concurrently with the main books in the series. So it's like, oh, well, this is the adventure that this character had while this book was going on. Because I have a large enough cast at this point, they can't all be in all of the books. So it's like, I had these 5 characters that were in the main book, but people want to know what these other characters were doing at that same time period. So it's like, well, here's what they were up to.
Oh, neat. That sounds like a really good idea for those bonuses for readers who want to stay in your world and are waiting for the next book, right?
Exactly. Because, yeah, a lot of my series, and especially because the 2 series I write are in a shared universe, a lot of it is based on the world building. Like, I've created an extensive world that has a large number of interesting characters in it, and they can all go off and have very different sorts of adventures. So.
Okay. Talk to me about what it looks like to get a book deal as a series. What did you pitch to the publisher? You said you got 3 books approved, or you got a contract for 3 books in the beginning. What did you pitch to the publisher at that point?
So I originally just pitched my first book, which was A Drop of Magic, and I pitched it as uh, series potential, because I knew that I wanted to write it as a series, but I wasn't sure if anyone would pick up a whole series from an unknown debut author. So I pitched just the first book. It can be read as a standalone book, and I pitched it with the series potential. And my publisher, Deborah Dixon, she loved the voice of my writing, and so she actually contracted for the first 3 books because when we had our chat, it was very clear that I wanted to write more in it, and she wanted more stories. And so I was like, cool. So yeah, we signed it for a 3-book deal, and that ended up being pretty standard as we went forward over, because she was my publisher for like the last 6 years. And we would pretty much do it in those 3-book increments. So I did 3, and then we did another 3, but then we created a very confusing overlap because that's when I ended up adding the Rifter series as well. And so then we started staggering them. So it would be, okay, so it's 1 Magic Smith and then 1 Rifter and then 1 Magic Smith and then 1 Rifter. And so the contracts got a little more complicated after that.
Interesting. And did you have to pitch to a large number? I mean, did you get an agent, and did you have to pitch to a large number of publishers, and how long did that take?
I did have an agent. So I met an agent at the Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers Colorado Gold Conference. We were actually sitting in a marketing class next to each other. And so we were writing up. It was literally a class about writing book pitches. And so the 2 of us were sitting next to each other, and we were kind of talking about how to write good book pitches. And obviously I was pitching my book. And so she's like, oh, this sounds interesting. Why don't you send it to me? And so I did. And so I ended up actually getting a contract with Bel Castro Agency. And then they did the pitching to the publisher for me. So it didn't actually take a crazy amount of time. Well, I'll say it didn't take a crazy number of pitches. It always takes a lot of time because obviously they have to read the manuscripts and things. But I think it was about 8 months after I got my agent that I got the contract for the publisher, which is a relatively good turnaround. And they had pitched to, oh, not that many, maybe somewhere between 10 and 15 publishers. So yeah, I felt pretty lucky actually about that.
That is great. And did you have the book finished when you were pitching it to the agent, like completely finished, edited, all of those things?
I did. So interesting thing happened. So I write urban fantasy, and I do have romance subplots in my stories, but I don't write romance. And this is a tricky line for some people to understand because a lot of people think urban fantasy and paranormal romance are the same genre, but they're not. So when I wrote urban fantasy and I was pitching that book, my agent actually asked me to add more romance scenes in because they wanted to pitch it to publishers as paranormal romance. So I did a draft that had more romance in it, even though I was like, well, I'm not sure this is the direction I want to go with this because I tend to like the more adventure-y aspects of books. Um, so I went ahead and did that. And then when the publisher accepted the book, they said, except it feels like it should be an urban fantasy, not a paranormal romance. So I want you to take a bunch of the romance out. And so I'm like, oh, okay. So
This is what I wanted to do in the first place.
exactly. So I was like, well, at least my publisher and I really saw eye to eye on how we wanted to present the story. So I was like, okay, happily. So I took out a bunch of the romance that my agent had me put in. um, but even at that point, the book, so it had been done and it had been edited and everything. But at that point, it was actually 120,000 words, which is a lot for a debut novel. So my publisher actually, we whittled it down and we edited it, we revised it, and we got it down actually to 86,000 words. So we cut a lot out of that first draft before we went to publishing. So yeah, there was definitely still some work to be done at that point. But that was the first time that I had really worked with somebody on that level of the publisher's editor. And so all of my subsequent books went a lot faster because I didn't have to have as many rounds of revision in them. I knew what she wanted. She knew what my writing style was, so we could communicate really quickly and be like, okay, I give her my draft and she goes, okay, here's a couple things that need to change. And then I'd go through and I'd rewrite it and we'd get it pretty clean really quickly, actually.
Fun. Yeah, that sounds like, were you upset by losing those 40,000, no, almost 40,000 words? Was that hard to give up for you? Or did you think, oh, they've given me a contract, they're buying my book, I'm happy to do whatever they want me to do?
Somewhere in between. So I've never had a problem taking criticism from people. I'm like, if somebody has an idea of how to make my stories better or stronger or more exciting or whatever, I am happy to take that under consideration. At the same time, I've never felt pressured to be like, oh, my publisher says they want it this way, I have to change it. I've had instances where my publisher was like, I think you should change this. And I'm like, I don't want to change that part. And she goes, okay. So yeah, it was a lot of back and forth. But like I said, at least my publisher and I were usually on the same page. And so both working towards the same goal. So I knew that everything that she asked me to look at as far as changes went was always done with that in mind, with just making the story stronger. And so my role as the author was to look at her advice and say, okay, can I see how this would make the story stronger? And sometimes I could see how her suggestion would make the story stronger, but I didn't like the suggestion itself. So I'd actually change different parts of the story so that I could add in the strength that she was wanting without changing the scene necessarily the way that she had suggested.
Okay, interesting. And in writing that first Magic Smith book, I got that right? Magic
Yes.
Smith. How long did you take to write it? Did you have a background in creative writing? How did you get to that point?
I've never had a background in creative writing. I do have a degree in English literature, so I've done a lot of literary analysis. I can say that academic writing and literary analysis are quite different than fiction writing, genre fiction writing in particular. Um, but I had dabbled in writing a few stories when I was in high school and whatnot, but mostly I liked to read. And so that's where the literature degree comes in, is because I had just read so many books that I was like, well, I might as well get credit for it.
Might as well keep doing what I love to do.
Exactly. Yeah. I went to college. I'm like, well, I like to draw and I like to read. So I got an art degree and an English degree. So
Right. So but from that degree, you knew how stories and plots and characters and point of view and all of those things
yeah.
work, correct?
So it did give me kind of a foundation for, I had spent so much time dissecting classic literature that I knew all the pieces that should be in it, right? I understood how it worked. And from the copious amount of reading that I had to do for that degree, I also just had a ridiculous amount of experience with just knowing what I liked and what I didn't like and seeing what worked and what didn't work. And so when I started writing, I had never taken a creative writing class or anything like that. I didn't belong to any writing groups at the time. I literally just sat down and I went, Well, I like to read a lot. I wonder if I could write my own story. Um, and so I sat down and I just, like I said, I outlined a story that turned out to be five. So I split out the first part and I'm like, okay, let's see if I can and make this a satisfying story and actually write the entire thing. It took me about 3 months to write that first story.
That's pretty quick for 120,000 words.
Yeah, it is. I actually, curiously enough, I've gotten slower over time, which is interesting. You would think that I would actually get faster at writing. I will say I have to do fewer revision drafts now, but as far as my first draft coming out, that was probably the fastest I've ever written a draft was that first one. And I think it's just because I was, one, really excited about the idea, and two, a little nervous that if I stopped at all, I might not get to the end. So I think I just wrote really frantically to get to the end because I'm like, I have to get it all out or I'm going to like never finish it. Because you always hear about, authors who never finish their books. And so I'm like, I have to get to the end. But yeah, so it was about 3 months to write the first draft of the first book. And then I took about a year to tweak it and edit it. And I did join a writers group so that I could get a little feedback and kind of see what other people were doing and like what I was supposed to do with the manuscript, even at that point, because I really had no idea how to go about getting it published. Or even if it was good enough to be published. So yeah, there was about a year to maybe a year to two, where I did a lot of just investigating the publishing industry and trying to figure out what the heck I was supposed to do with this story now that I'd written it.
Did you hire a professional editor before you were pitching it, or did you just self-edit?
I self edited it at first, and then I did ask a critique partner to look through some of it, and then I also have a friend who is highly meticulous. And so I actually had her do a lot of the more line editing kind of parts of it. But yes, it's because I wasn't sure if I was good enough to be an author yet. I didn't want to spend a bunch of money that, like, obviously I wasn't earning anything off my books. So I didn't want to spend a bunch of money at first. And so I went with basically very roundabout solutions for finding editors.
Right. And that, I mean, I think, do you feel like when you pitch a book, I mean, it has to be well written if they're reading pages, right? It has to be grammatically correct, mostly error-free, all of those things, but also it's about the story and about the characters and about the voice a
Yes.
little bit more because they can fix some of those things by line editing or whatever. And like you said, the editor, the publisher wanted this to be 100 or 85,000, pared down compared to what
Yeah.
it started as.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and that's going to happen anytime that you then introduce another level. Like I said, when I had my agent, they were like, well, we should change things this way. And then when I had the publisher, they're like, well, we should change things this way. So even if you have hired professional editors and you've gone through developmental editing and copy editing and line editing and all of those versions of editing, once you start working with a publisher, if you're not self-publishing it, you're going to have to change it again because they have their own editors, their own ideas about how they want it to work.
Right. Yeah. Because if I hire my editor, they're just going to make it. I mean, they might say, oh, this needs to be amped up here because there's not enough action, or, I think you could make this stronger, or this, they might developmentally tweak things or suggest things, but they're basically following your cue of what you want your book to be as someone you hire. But then, like you said, your agent or a publisher has their own ideas.
Exactly. So, like for me, because I hadn't ever dabbled in the publishing industry before, that's why I decided to go traditionally published to begin with, was because I didn't know the industry. And so for me, on that first book, especially when Deborah gave me feedback, I really listened to it and I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the developmental editing process. And I think that's why moving forward, my books needed fewer and fewer revision drafts because I had that in the back of my mind of like, oh, this is how we deal with pacing, and this is how we, those things that I could see the problems as I was writing, so I could take care of them before I ever sent the manuscript in. But to start out with, I did really need that someone who had already been in the industry for, 20, 25 years and had an idea of what worked in the market and how to make my books appealing to the audience that I was shooting for.
Right. And how much marketing, I know this is kind of off the topic of the series a little bit, but how much I think most authors want to know, especially people that are traditionally published, how much marketing do the publishers do versus you do? Is that separated? Is it a coordinated effort?
In my case, it was a coordinated effort. So I was publishing through mid-sized press, so not one of the big five. So I am sure if you are signed on with the big five, it would be a very different experience. But because I was with a mid-level publisher, and I worked very closely with my publisher, like we really partnered on a lot of it. We worked together to create my covers, to create my back cover blurbs, and we planned for our marketing. If I had promotions and things that I was doing, I made sure to let them know. When they were discounting books and putting them on promotion, they made sure to let me know. And when we wanted to do large pushes that were costly, we actually split the cost of it 50-50 so that neither I nor the publisher had to absorb the full brunt of the cost of those.
And were those things in your contract, your publishing contract, or were they separate marketing contracts, or how did that work? Or you just said, hey, this is going to work for us?
Yeah, it was just a works for us kind of thing. So there was no specific wordage in the contract that said, yes, this is how marketing is going to be split between the author and the publisher. So they could have cut me loose on marketing and said, you're on your own. But they didn't. So, and certainly they could have done more stuff, but again, they were a mid-size. It's not like they had a huge marketing budget either. So, my publisher and I, we grew to be friends and worked well together. And so when we wanted to have something happen, like if I was like, hey, I really want to, put out comp title, or not comp titles, like free giveaways for the Nebula conference or something like that, then she'd work with me and we'd get them the books and things like that. So it was a lot of just communication is basically what it came down to. Is I would say, this is what I want to have happen. How can you help me with that? And she'd be like, well, we can pick up this part or we can do this. And so yeah, it was a good relationship.
Well, this has been so interesting. We've gotten so much information from you. Do you have any final notes, words to the wise that you would tell someone if they're thinking about writing a series, thinking about pitching it to a publisher, anything about that process?
One piece of advice that I would give anybody who's planning to write in a series is make sure that you take well-organized notes as you go. Like when I started writing the first book, I just wrote it. I didn't make notes about anything because I'm like, oh, whatever, I'll remember. And that wasn't a problem for the first and the second and the third book. On book 8, when I'm trying to describe someone and I have to remember the way that I described them in book 3, it becomes a problem. So absolutely, if you are writing in a series, make sure that you have documentation about what your characters look like, what their personalities are like, speech affectations, anything like that that's going to need to be consistent over the course of the entire series. Because it is really a pain to have to go back and track down those individual passages after the fact.
Thank you so much for coming to talk to us about your series. Hopefully, we've had some good words for authors who are thinking about writing in a series.
Anybody who wants advice, I'm always happy to talk. So, yep, keep writing.
You've been listening to The Cal Zone, the official podcast of the Colorado Authors League, supporting and promoting its creative community since 1931. Learn more about us at coloradoauthors.org. This is a production of the nonprofit Colorado Authors League.